This is unheard of for me, but we are actually ahead of time, so I'm feeling quite proud today, which means we've got about 10 minutes or so where I'm happy to open up to the floor for any questions for any of our panellists. So is there anything that anybody has heard where you've got a burning question that you would like to ask? Yes, sir. We've got a microphone. We just get it down there. Thank you.
This young guy be fit walking around with a mic, won't he? So it's John, another John from Zumtobel Group. And well done, John. The question really I had is definitely to the group. I was at a construction framework event the other week, and the CEO of what is known as the Liverpool Knowledge Quarter basically made a really good point. I think it's really more relevant to city centres in some respects, i.e. we've stopped building for people, and we're building more for the economy, for people to make money. And one of the things that came up was the link between private investment and also the councils, and in particular town planners, and the possibility of where there's a private developer, ensuring that the rules within a city centre in particular, but more broadly within councils, especially in these days of austerity, were in place to say, if you are going to build here, be it a housing estate or whatever, you must provide things for the community, like a school, like a health centre, which is already being pushed and promoted, but maybe not a leisure facility, not somewhere where people can go and do exercise. So I'd like to pass that over to you and see what you think about that.
Any thoughts, public-private kind of, and rules? I mean, I always think with, in the work of Greater Manchester, I've always said if we could just tell everybody that they have to do this, then actually life would be a lot easier, wouldn't it? But sadly, I can't be bossing people about. Claire, did you have a comment?
I think I completely agree with you. It sits across all sectors, and I would say the third sector as well. I think from our perspective, we are trying to encourage authorities not to think just within a red line boundary of development. It's actually seeing where that money could actually support facilities, for example, existing parks, existing leisure and sports facilities that are there. Can we take a much more comprehensive look at this to understand how each development supports that neighbourhood or that place? I would also say because we do a lot of work with rural communities as well, this is equally a challenge in rural communities, and aspects people always assume in rural communities people are much more active. Sometimes they are, but also some of the barriers that they have around transport or access or social inclusion really do prevent people being as active as they could be. So what I would say is we, in the built environment, there are a plethora of trusts and foundations in health, in care. If I look at organisations such as the government's What Works centres, and I'd encourage everyone to go and look at centres, the What Works centres of government, such as the Centre for Ageing Better. There is data there that would really help us rethink how we address these challenges. There are charities such as Age UK, but lots of charities who are in the sphere of health and wellbeing who again have lots of data that really reinforces these issues as well. I think we need to change our thinking around it, but also, and I can say, having dealt with lots of developers, often they are not clear on how they can best support. And they are saying to us, certainly on things such as an ageing population, we don't know what people really need. We don't know quite what will support them. So I think from our perspective, and it's why I'm emphasising we're using tools from the service design world, is how do we best understand what people need, and how can we then make sure that provision, whether it's in a single development or more readily across a neighbourhood or city, supports them.
And I'd just like to add, I think those morals and ethics are very good in principle. I think the challenge that we've got, especially in the construction industry, whether you're a construction company or a manufacturer of equipment that goes into the construction industry, is this design and build era that we live in, where many construction companies and manufacturers are struggling to stay in business right now, and many of them are actually losing money. So it's how do we make it affordable to be able to support those communities?
Yeah, I mean, are there any other thoughts? Because I'm just thinking from, it's one thing having that conversation within your locality on a specific project, but actually, as you rightly pointed out, there's a lot of insight there. So if I think of the age-friendly city and look at Manchester, you know, even things like, you know, having more seating within parks, using working toilets, etc. They're just tiny little things, don't cost a huge amount of money, but actually mean that perhaps somebody who's less mobile can enjoy a walk around the park because they know they've got 4 points at which they can sit. You know, how Charles, Hugh, do we get to a position where actually people understand that it's known because the information is there?
Well, I mean, we've worked hard on our active design guidance, and we need to do more to drive that through, I think. We need to look, we need to make the point, we're working with Town and Country Planning Association, and they've done some recent survey which shows that in that right environment, the developers can charge anything up to £30,000-40,000 for more for the equivalent dwelling. So there is a bonus to be had for the big developers. But we see particularly where they're developing and where they're selling off multiple plots, we really encourage them to do that against an overall design brief that includes the physical infrastructure, like your benches, like your cycleways, like your walkways, and control the development so that we are building these principles in. And then, as we say, creating those community hubs within that as part of the Section 106 or the planning game within that. I don't think the SIL planning regulations helped us because it used to be formulaic, now it isn't. And with government, with the austerity cuts, there's lots of pressure on that planning gain money. And we've got to make sure it comes into the infrastructure because of the benefits of the physical activity against the wider agendas.
And just a couple of things to add from our side, a growing growing interest from housing developers with the work that we do at UK Active. A couple of examples, we've kicking off a couple of pilots in 2019, one with Inspired Villages, Legal and General, looking at physical activity pilot in a new retirement home in Exeter to understand the physicality and the programs which work in that retirement village. And then secondly, embarking Riverside as one of the healthy new towns, where there are 11,000 homes going in, you know, a blue water strategy around how to utilise the river at its widest, one of the widest points in London, to look at how that can be utilised by not only the historical communities there, but the new communities coming in. So it becomes part of the fabric of health and well-being associated with that community.
Oh, watch this space. We've probably got time for one more question. Is there anybody? Yes, sir.
Yeah, one of the biggest areas in a development I've encountered is sustainable drainage storage areas, which take up, in designs of housing developments and so forth, they take up a lot of space, and the planners are much more preoccupied, the developers seem to be much more preoccupied, quite rightly, with getting those sustainable drainage systems operational and through the planning. But it seems to me there's a lot of there's not a great deal of expertise in the possibilities of combining outdoor facilities or sports surfaces, in my case, which I've been looking at, combining long-term storage parts of developments with possible uses for sports and leisure. And looking around at the housing developments that I've been looking at and making observations, I'm one of those sad people who actually takes photographs of these things. They seem very functional, but they're not very attractive, and they're certainly no use to anybody. But they take up a hell of a lot of space, and it seems to me that with a bit of imagination and some creative design, a lot of those areas could be developed into more serviceable spaces.
Okay. Any thoughts on that? Anybody?
There's a very good opportunity we're looking at the moment with a sort of storage system which basically lies underneath a pitch. So, and then around it you can have rebed technology and that sort of thing, so you can create the blue space that we talked about. So there's a lot of work on it, and we're spending quite a lot of money with a number of the pitch sports to develop something that will create storage and create space that we can then use so we can have sporting activity and we can have an environmental solution as well. So we hope that that the study on that will be out sort of next year.
Interesting. We could probably squeeze in one more. Is there any... Right, lady in the red at the back, because I just feel like the gentleman with the microphone needs to run, maybe? Oh, there we go.
More professional, but I'll keep it more from a personal level. Actually, it's just want to know if there's a responsibility on sport hall facilities to provide practice court space. Because you have a bit of a situation if you've got sports like basketball, for example. If you want to practice with your kids, or even elite players want to practice on their own, there's a situation, but sports halls only really provide for badminton and table tennis unless you want to hire a whole hall. So, for example, on the weekend, if I want to play my 10 and 12-year-old, £60 an hour becomes unachievable, when actually all you need really is nets to kind of separate badminton-sized spaces. But, I mean, and a story, you know, I live in Surrey, but I've got a spreadsheet of London and Surrey sport halls, and the reason why they won't give affordable access to basketball, it could be handball, or kids that want to just practice their hockey skills on a space. But sometimes when you speak to leisure centres, there's almost a pride in that, no, you can't hire it unless you're willing to provide £60. And I just wonder, because there's kind of Sport England funding, whether there's a responsibility on sport halls to sort of give access.
Good question. That was a really good question. Any thoughts, Charles, or Hugh from your membership base?
Go first.
You go first.
I suppose the glib answer is get 50 friends and hire the whole court, and then we'd be really happy about it. We're looking at a lot of the usage. In the end, we think there's a lot of activity that a court is not suitable for, and there's the right sort of space. So you might well find that your activity is better in that school space, in that village hall space, than within that sort of leisure centre space. Now, we're looking at a lot of the technology about how you use a court differently. We've recently put one of these fancy glass floors in with all the markings and so forth. But definitely more flexible space, indoor and outdoor, is something that we're looking at. Some of it is driven by the sport standards. We're still designing international level court space in a rural community, which is a nonsense really. We're never going to play international badminton or basketball in those spaces. So we need to be more flexible on space and more pragmatic and make it more flexible. And we're doing a lot of prototyping to make that happen and putting a lot more innovative solutions into those spaces. It comes back to what I said earlier, design for flexibility and for future trends, because you're building a building that's lasting 25 years and you can absolutely guarantee what the offer will be in 5 years will not be what it is now. So we need to be much more flexible, much less rigid than we are in our design parameters than we are at the moment.
And just to echo that from our side, you know, 100% the ambition to utilise the facilities we've got to the max, but to have that flexibility for the community and the customer from that side. Now, what we're finding when we are having the conversations between the leisure operators and the national governing bodies of sport, there is a longer-term sustainable opportunity to then roll those programs out across the country. Another example, we're having preliminary conversations with the FA around their futsal strategy, you know, because that need to play that within probably within an indoor flexible space. Now, the ability there is to bring the two major players together, the operators and the national governing body, to then see how that can roll out. I suppose instead of having piecemeal ad hoc conversations, you have a much more overarching strategy, which then sees the incentive of the leisure centre to then take up the opportunities at a much more local level.
I think
Things that could happen, such as just installing a net, because actually, even with the international level, that's great. Often what players want is just a badminton-sized space to get some cones, get their drills on, and then you've got any sport, any player of any level can just get busy, as opposed to needing 10 friends to do it. Actually provides that flexibility, so that'd be great.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and it's and also, like, as an individual, you don't necessarily want to just. You might want to go and use the mugger and those outdoor spaces. You see a lot of people scrimmaging in a park, but actually you might want to be able to practice for your match that's coming up. And I think it's a really valid point. So to the operators in the room, ponder. Get your thinking caps on that one.
And also the space within where people live. So let's turn a bit of outdoor space. Remember those pictures I showed earlier of that horrible sort of urban environment? We're doing a lot of areas. So there's a whole sort of mixture from a goal space to a hoop space to those sorts of areas. So it becomes a sort of multiple activity centre and 200 yards sort of running tracks and things like that within those urban squares and so forth as well. So you don't need necessarily to go along to the leisure centre, you can do it within your communities as well. And we're doing a few of those, and we'll see how those deliver a little bit of that. But that means 100 yards from your front door you can go and play basketball with your friends.
So Surrey is the place to set one of them up.
Yeah, we'll do a few.